Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about these UPSs used in conjunction with these over here, network attached storage devices. And in today's video I want to go through all of the things that you need to know before you buy yourself a UPS for your NAS server. But before we go any further, we have a whole bunch of disclaimers to get out of the way. Number one, I'm not going to really talk about recommended UPSs for your NAS setup until the end of the video. I've got a whole detailed video in the works right now where I'm going to look at 1 and 2 bays and 4 bays and 6 and 8 bays and recommended different UPSs for those. And it's a much bigger video than this. But at the end of this video, I will quickly summarize all of those recommendations right at the end of the video. So if you're looking at the bottom of the video on the time bar there should be a chapter there at the end that will tell you the exact recommendations. If you came to the video for specific UPS recommendations, head there. The rest of the video is about giving you lots of things you need to know before you buy UPS. All the things that you may forget, all the things that people always overlook when they're buying a UPS. Not just when they're getting a UPS for NAS, but just generally when they spend too much or they buy the wrong UPS for their needs. As well as this, I've also done a video where I've detailed a lot more about the mathematics behind UPSs. So for example, this whole business of when you see them online and they're listed with VA voltage amps there, and a lot of the time the devices we use are listed by watts in terms of their power consumption and the overall PSUs they use. You have to do a bunch of maths there. I've already worked that out in another video that's linked in the description along with an article below that will break that down for you. But don't worry, all of the NASs, all of the UPSs I'm going to talk about, I'm going to make sure to break them down into the watt coverage there that they include. It can be very, very important indeed. But again, this video is about detailing the things that people always forget about UPSs, as well as helping you understand not only what a UPS is, but also how to choose the right one for your home or office environment there. Let's cut on to number one. So straight off the bat, this is a common one, and this is to do with that number. Whenever you see UPSs being displayed, they always have that V8 number there at the front. It'll be 1000 V8, 850 or 650 or whatever V8, that voltage amps numbers there. But you should be more concerned with the watts that translates into. Now, there are loads of calculators online that allow you to work that out, but the majority, with the exception, weirdly, of APC, the majority of brands out there that produce UPSs, and lots of brands have risen to the front, including Amazon themselves, that I'll touch on later on, have arrived on the scene. They publish the conversion to watts for you. You don't have to do that maths anymore. So you can, if you want, use calculators. If you like working in voltage amps, which is an odd way to work when everything else is in watts, but still nonetheless, right now you don't have to go down that road. And most of these brands, particularly CyberPower, for their credit, publish the watts, the watt coverage and draw on their systems on their main pages. And indeed, if you break down into a lot of the product pages, they actually break that down quite well into different devices as well. This is often overlooked and something that isn't quite as cut and dry as people think. A lot of the devices we buy have a PSU. That PSU is what's effectively taking direct mains current that's going into your home or office and making it readily available to the operational features within any of our technology. However, the number that's stated on there is a maximum number. So in the case, for example, of all of these NASs here I've got next to me, they all arrive with external PSUs of different sizes. So there's a 36 watt PSU with this one. This device down here is a 100 watt PSU. This device here has a 90 watt PSU. All of them arrive with external power bricks there that are rated to that power. However, that is not the power they are using all the time. It is a maximum number, and much like when you buy a 2-litre bottle of soda or Coke or any soft drink that you want, if you buy a 2-litre bottle of something, yes, there's 2 litres in there, but if you keep using it, it can hold less than that. It doesn't always have 2 litres in it. You can fill it up halfway if you choose. And ultimately, when it comes to the PSUs, the power supply units, internal or external, for your PCs, for your laptops, for your phones and your NASs, that number represents a maximum. And just because it's the maximum doesn't mean it's going to be drawing that all of the time. So when you factor in devices for your UPS, it is sensible to work with those as maximums. So if a PSU on a NAS is say 90 watts, it is sensible to provision that NAS as 90 watts as a block, because that is the maximum potential draw. But it's worth remembering when push comes to shove that unless you are flat out using all of its bells, whistles, features, drives, PCIs and everything, you're not going to be drawing that full sum. And it's about having that channel of what bandwidth, if you will, open between the NAS and the UPS. So do bear that in mind. Now this next one may seem a little bit counter to what I just spoke about there with regards to maximum coverage of those PSUs that these devices arrive with in watts, but it is incredibly important that you over provision that power, because whether you are utilizing your UPS to keep these devices running for an indefinite period so you can continue using them, or just enough time to safely save docks and let the device automatically or manually shut down, you need to over provision. So say for example you're going for a UPS of when it's converted after VA into watt conversion, that it covers 500 or 600 watts. Now say for example you are utilizing a NAS that has 120 or 100 watt PSU. So you've got 100 watt PSU to factor in there. You've still got 400 or so to play with there on that UPS, right? Well, if you're going to be connecting PCs to that device as well, some of those might be ranked at a 250 watt PSU. If you're a laptop, you're lucky, it might be smaller using efficient processors. But add those up, and what you might find is you've only got 100 to 150 watts left to play with. Now, it is very important that you have sufficient extra power on top of what you've kind of provisioned and blocked for your devices to allow for these devices to run for an indefinite period after the event of a power failure. Now, of course, that goes to intermittent power failure and stuff like that we've talked about before, like brownouts and stuff like that. But depending on your own setup and what you intend to do in the event of a power shutdown, whether it is that you're thinking it's just going to be a temporary 1 minute or 10-second drop or longer, you need to provision ahead. And what I recommend is when you are adding up all of your devices, and if you've got a 250 watt PC, a 100 watt laptop, a bunch of miscellaneous devices at around 50 watt aggregate and 100 watt PSU, take whatever that number is and then add 50 to 70%. 50% if you intend for the devices to safely save documents and shut down, and 70% if you want to run checks and making sure everything's running fine before you manually shut it down, or use some UPS's auto shutdown where it's running out of power itself and then forces devices to shut down. But always over provision for that power. Don't just add up the wattage of all of the devices you've got connected and then get a UPS for that exact number. This is another point that often gets overlooked in one specific way, but just because a UPS has a higher rating in terms of VA and therefore watt coverage than another UPS doesn't mean they're equal in terms of plugs and outputs. Now, you think the bigger the VA and watt rating, the more ports it's going to have, but that's just simply not the case. And because a lot of the time these are the same similar chassis being used by these brands, and then they add more batteries to add more coverage and therefore more power, the result is the chassis space never really changes, and therefore the number of plug points very rarely increases that much. Now, for example, in the case of this device here, this 1500 VA rated CyberPower, this one here has 8 sockets there on the rear, whereas this device at 750 VA, we turn it around, these are not light devices, this has 6 plugs there on the rear. Only 2 plug difference, but twice the coverage in terms of VA there. And on top of that, it's worth highlighting that when you do get a device that's got multiple plugs, some of them will be surge protected and some of them not. Some devices, as they get more and more complex, as you can see here, some of them have individual surge protection and other features that the others don't, and it diverts and divides certain features between the plugs for more higher or lower priority devices. So sometimes what you see between two UPSs of near identical power or near identical price point is that the plug coverage differs between them. So always make sure there's enough plug points, obviously, for all the devices you're going to connect. You would have thought of that. But also check if, although it may say 6 to 8 plugs, that some of them are better than others. And therefore, will there be enough plugs to cover the more high priority devices for the features you need? Now, technically, most users will have thought of this, but the sad point is not everyone has, and it will affect, by the way, your buying decision when you're going for a UPS, not just for a NAS, but just generally, because a lot of people used to assume that you'd get a UPS in case the power fails in your home or office environment. If the power fails, you can carry on doing your work and either shut down the devices or keep working until the power comes back on. Fair and well. But things aren't that simple. There are things such as intermittent power. So what you end up with is, although the power going into your home or office environment is fine, the actual wiring or current in your building isn't A1. And the result is you may have slightly flaky power adoption and circuitry in your home or business environment, some of which may be beyond your control because you don't own it and you're letting or renting the office space, and the result is you may not even be aware of just how flaky that power is. And that's another great reason to have that running into a NAS and then into a UPS, and all the other devices running from the UPS, whether directly into it or using power splitters coming out of this device with like extensions and more. On top of that, there is a term that is growing in utilization, and that's brownout. Unlike a blackout where it all goes away, brownout again is about that slightly wavy electric support, but outside of your office environment and becoming a great deal more regional if you're living in more rural areas, or currently due to energy price crisis and energy availability crisis in areas of Europe due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict still persisting at this time. The result is that we're seeing a lot of power access kind of failures and dips all across Europe that again will be served to be kind of avoided with the right UPS. Now, a lot of that you may know, and if you're going to get a UPS anyway, you might be thinking, oh, who cares? I'm going to get the UPS anyway, I'm covered. You might not be, because not all UPSs work in that way. And what you don't want to go for is a particularly cheap UPS that, although it has surge protection to protect you from a massive delivery of power, it doesn't have the intelligence to understand low power injection. And the result is you may have a UPS that when you have small or intermittent dips in your power, it will switch over and send incorrect signals to your devices to shut them down when you don't want them to. Or it will be a device that when it's charging the batteries, it will actually be detrimental to the batteries because it's not intelligent enough to understand the difference between a blackout or a brownout. So do bear that in mind if you're getting a UPS, because you are in a home or office environment where you are getting it less because of all out power cuts and more because of intermittent wavy power. Make sure you go for a UPS that is intelligent enough to understand the difference between them and therefore be a great deal more effective and efficient in its deployment when needed. You know how they say how expensive printer ink is? Well, another area of IT where there is kind of an artificial pricing in place is to do with replacement batteries on UPS devices. Now, this is going to slightly tread on the toes of the point I'm going to make after this, so I'll leave it there. Just wanted to add that point. But when it comes to getting a UPS that has either replaceable batteries in its lifetime or has battery expansion packs that you can put in, these work out tremendously expensive, and they are based on the idea that when you do set up a UPS in your home or office environment, that it's not really convenient to just completely chuck the device and get a brand new one. You want to keep the setup, keep the rig, and all you want to do is take out the batteries that may have gone beyond their 100% effective lifespan, and generally batteries inside a UPS come with between a 2 and 3 year guaranteed warranty supported replacement period. And then they kind of built around the idea that it's going to be so difficult to remove the UPS in its current environment that you buy the battery packs or an expansion pack of power to bolster its coverage in terms of volt amps and watts. Now, the reason I talk about the expense there is because you are sort of being taken for a ride because of the convenience of those packs. Much like network attached storage devices and expansions, when you get a NAS, this NAS here, for example, this is the DS920. You can pick it up for about 500 nicker. It's a 4-bay there. It's got intelligence with CPU, memory. It runs the whole thing. You know, it's got its own RAID. It does everything. An expansion for that is to add 5 bays onto it. The DX517, a 5-bay expansion. It has no brain, no RAID, no network connectivity, and is an eSATA JBOD, which have existed for about 15 years. And that device is about £400. It is almost the cost of another NAS, but you are paying for the convenience of adding 5 drives to an existing setup. That methodology exists here with UPSs that require that basically are built around the idea of buying battery packs, overcharging substantially. So do bear that in mind. If you're going for a UPS device and you have been convinced or at least slightly won over by the idea that you can keep the unit and add in new batteries for the sake of sustainability, do bear in mind that those extra batteries and add-on packs come with a hefty cost indeed. However, one way to get around the cost of those batteries, of course, is to double down on power early doors. Yes, you're still going to be contending with that idea of how much power the batteries are going to be able, how long they're going to last for. But when you buy these devices early doors, as much as those battery expansions and add-on packs cost later to continue with your existing machine, when you look at a lot of these series from the beginning, such as this, the Cyber Power I series here, available in 750, 1000 and 1500, and I believe it's gone up to 2000 as well in terms of voltage amps, I will state that each tier of those 750, 1000, 1500, etc. is very, very small, and if you try to buy those little modules of batteries later as add-ons, it's going to cost you substantially more. So what I'm saying is, if you think you're going to go for a UPS that's 750 VA, you may find that just paying just a little bit more for a 1000 is so small that, given that this system's going to last for a number of years in the amount of effectiveness of those batteries, even after 2 years or 3 years when those batteries might say we're not running at 100% efficiency, there's still going to be a larger capacity overall because you spent less early on. So the depreciating factor of 1000 VA when you were originally looking at 750 will mean that even at lower efficiency there, it should compensate and find a balance there, so it's cheaper to buy the bigger version of the UPS earlier than it will be to buy the smaller UPS now and go for battery packs later or replacement batteries down the line. You are going to have to balance that, of course, just a little bit in little factors like whether you're going to need increased plug points or if they're there at all, and of course the actual cost of charging this up each time if it is going to be a depreciating factor. But overall, I would still recommend, if you're concerned about the overcost of those extra batteries in swappable UPSs or battery packs, I would say overshoot on the early UPS you go for, because the extra couple of years it may give you will kind of balance out rather than spending more on those packs down the line. Once again, this next point may seem counterintuitive, but because the market for UPSs has opened up substantially over the last few years to introduce other brands and other providers into the market, and again, we aren't going to look at ones that provide batteries that die after a year. We're only talking about brands that will supply at least 2 years of coverage on those individual batteries there and 2 to 3 years on system warranty as well. But because the market has got a lot more contenders in it, the actual pricing of UPSs has become a great deal more attractive than just a handful of years ago when APC were largely dominating the whole market. They still have the lion's share, but I would not say their position is as dominant as ever. And the result is that in some cases, and more often than you think, it actually works out more cost effective and better overall to go for a small and a medium sized UPS than to go for one larger one overall. And by that, what I mean is, Yes, there's going to be devices in your home or network environment that are a priority. Maybe the PC you use for work, maybe your UPS, and other devices that are priorities that are really low power, like your router, like a switch. And these devices don't all have to draw from the same UPS, do they? And rather than going for a larger UPS, what you can go for is an incredibly low-end 30 to 50 pound UPS to run switches, routers and stuff like that. All of these devices that have 12 watt and 20 watt PSUs that once again won't be going to capacity, and then get a separate 350 to 500 watt PSU UPS to support those more priority devices. Again, like NASs that maybe have a 100 watt PSU, like your home PC or laptop that has 2 to 250 watt PSU. Now again, the reason you make a saving compared with going for one larger UPS there is because all of those are going to be running from the same plug point. All of them, you're going to be separating that power and overcompensating them accordingly, but your router can run for an exceptionally long amount of time on that low power in a way that your NAS, you'll want to auto shut down. And in some cases, you won't want all the devices to shut down. You're certainly not going to want your router to shut down. That's going to be one of the last things you want to shut down. So that's another convincing, not just the fact that you can make that saving, but you want to make sure that some devices are on a circuit where you don't want them or don't need them to safely power down, and others you do want to safely shut down. So again, the saving isn't huge, but it can actually be quite effective to run a small and a medium UPS rather than a large one. This last point isn't really one of those things people forget points, but really just something of housekeeping. But a lot of users aren't aware that Amazon have their own basics range of UPSs that cover between 350 and 500 watts. And they are by far the cheapest in the market. They still provide the warranty and coverage that I would definitely say is a minimum that you expect from these devices. But for those of you out there that are running very, very modest setups, and we're not just talking about, 1 or 2 bays, I'm talking ones that are running on Realtek processors there, or NASs that are really only being used for multimedia, or you live on like a houseboat or something, or you're living on a mobile home. These UPSs have very good reviews. They are built by the brands that we've talked about, but rebadged, and ultimately these are a much more cost-effective UPS that a lot of users still don't really know about. And I recommend, if you're going to go for an incredibly cost-effective UPS and you aren't any kind of high business user, maybe check those out. I'll link to a couple of them in the description, but there isn't a huge range and their stock is really light due to them just being very popular, but weirdly unknown. Which brings us now to the UPSs I would recommend for different NAS setups. Again, as mentioned, I'm going to do a much more detailed version of this particular segment of the video in its own standalone video very soon. But for those of you that came to this video where you've bought a NAS or you're on the verge of buying a NAS and you want to know the right UPS setup for your needs, let me go through them. So I haven't just broken this down into the NAS size, but no one's going to own a NAS and not other equipment. So let's start off with the first entry point there. This will be people that go for a 1 or 2 bay NAS. These are users that have at least one standard PC. So I'm going to say a 250 watt desktop PC. You can have a router. Let's go really greedy and say a 30 watt PSU router there, and miscellaneous equipment, monitors, bits and bobs, and maybe some sort of office peripheral. We're going to give that maybe 50 watt on top there. So if your setup is a 1 or 2 bay NAS, so again that's going to be 60 to 90 watts. Hopefully this is all on screen. If you're in the UK, I would still recommend going for this APC. It's the APC 8 port. It's the BE650G2. This will give coverage up to about 400 watts. And again, much like I mentioned earlier in this video, as it's part of a series range, it actually scales. You can get one as low as 150 watts of coverage up to 520 watts of coverage within that scale. But I would say for a 1 or 2 bay setup, play it safe and go for the 400 watt one there, the 650G2, because that will give you ample coverage for safe shutdown, and maybe even running some of the stuff there in the background. On top of that, I'd say if you're in the US, things are slightly different when it comes to buying a UPS between the UK and Europe and the US, not only because of the presentation of these, but also how devices are advertised with their power usage. And for you guys, still within the APC, but I would recommend going for the BE600M1, and that is, it's a 7-port switch there, and this not 7-port switch, 7-port UPS, and it's again, it scales as low as 330 watts of coverage up to 520 watts there. And again, both of these UPSs I've discussed here, they both knock around for about 80 to 100, maybe 110 of your local currency there. So again, if you're running a 1 or 2 bay, those are the two I'd recommend right now. And I will detail this in the article below, so don't worry about writing down those proxy model IDs, they'll be listed. Now for 4 to 6 bays, this is where things can get a little bit tricky, because most 4 bays arrive with an external PSU, whereas 6 bays, that's where you start to see a lot more desktop NAS devices that have got internal PSUs. And internal PSUs, generally, for the sake of cost efficiency, they're going to be higher. So for the 4 bay, we're going to scale for between 100 watt PSU and 250 watt for this 4 to 6 bay NAS device there. Now alongside that, if you're going to go for a 4 or 6 bay, you're going to be a slightly bigger setup there. So I'd say 2 PCs at least at 250 watt. And again, you can scale that. Laptops will be less. You might be running a MacBook that's super efficient, or tablets and stuff like that. But I'm going to give 500 watt, that's 250 watt PCs. I'm going to say both a router and a switch. So again, 30 watt and 25 watt respectively. And on top of that, for your miscellaneous equipment, basically double what I talked about just now. So we're going to give that 100 watt on top. Also, if you're running that kind of setup with those kind of machines, you're going to expect a little bit more than just auto shutdown. So I'm going to say around 5 to 10 minutes of runtime on those devices, and an auto shutdown at low power on the UPS. Now for those two, if you're in the UK, I would recommend the CyberPower follow-up to this one. That is the PFC series. That has, again, a range of coverage between 780 watts and 900 watts. I'm sorry, I keep looking at my notes, but there's a lot to take in. Retailing for as low as 200 odd nicker, depending on the watts you go for. It goes up to about 250, 280. And that is a 6 outlet, 6 plug, all of those ports, from what I understand, are all surge protected as well there. And again, all of the UPSs I'm talking about today have either full or partial network communication as well, either by a UPS connection or just general network keep, because they've got a LAN port attached. Now, if you're in the US, you actually do quite well, because the same product series from CyberPower is available, but due to improvements in the pricing, and particularly towards the batteries that are included, you can pick up the 12 outlet version, the CP1500, for a very similar price. And it's got, there's more choices of different voltage amps, which of course converts into wattage. But if you're going to go for a 4 to 6 bay, you're going to need to aim somewhere at that between 5, maybe 750 watts of coverage there to have that extra compensation. And if you are running a pro setup there, particularly if you're running 4s or 6 bays that are running more aggressive CPUs and therefore have better PCIe upgrade options on there, then do spring a little bit extra and go for the higher end CP1500 there that will cover up to 900 watts. Now for 8 to 12 bays, that's where things get really complex. Not so much in the NAS department, but more towards people that buy 8 to 12 bay NASs. That is the rack mount entry point there. So not only are you running NASs that are going to have between 250 and 500 watt PSUs, but also with the rack mounts, you may even be factoring in redundant PSUs as well. On top of this, the setup you're going to have an 8 to 12 bay is mostly always business, or at this point we've moved out of small business and into medium business, and even entering the tippy toes of high. The result is at least 4 PCs communicating with it. So we're going to go again with our 250 watts. You're already going to have a 1000 watt PSU consideration for your PCs, and then on top of that, alongside the router, you're probably going to be factoring in 10 GBE due to the throughput of those NASs, and a lot of 10 GBE switches have got enhanced power. A lot of 10G switches have external PSUs for that matter as well. So you're going to have to scale that up. I'm going for 100 watt PSU, keeping the router one as well. And then finally, miscellaneous equipment, we're going to quadruple what we started with and get to 250 watt for the individual accessories. So at this point, not only have you got all that additional power, but because you've got so many bits of client hardware in the mix, on top of that, you're going to have to take into consideration the length of time you need them to run, because that much hardware, it's not going to be convenient for a nice auto shutdown on all of them as soon as the UPS kicks in. So you're going to have to factor in and provision a decent amount of extra time to factor all that in. The result is that the UPSs we're looking at now, we've got to exceed 2000 VA. And if you're a UK user and thinking about going, future-proofing on this, and desktop ones are hard to come by, I would recommend APC's Smart SynWave supported version there. It should be on screen. This is available in as low as 750 VA, which again isn't really appropriate to this, but goes all the way up to 3000 VA, which roughly translates to about 2.5, close to 2700 watts, depending on which one of the individual tiers you go for. Now, not all good news. The price tag is going to be between $1,200 and $1,700. I say dollars because it actually translates to both pounds and dollars pretty evenly. Currency hasn't had a blinding look in here at all. Also, this device has 8 outlet points there to cover all the devices that I've spoke about. But if you need more outlet points, that's where you're going to have to start looking into those rack mount devices as well there. And again, when you reach this tier, once you exceed about 2000 VA, that's when you want to make sure the UPS devices you look at have got support of, say, client insurance cover. APC include that on some of their devices, but also that whole kind of guarantee on the batteries of 2 to 3 years. So if they do start showing any signs of inefficiency or loss of production, do you get them replaced within that period there? Now, I could talk about rack mounts, but when we do get into the rack mounts of 16, 24 bays and higher, that's when you're talking about multiple UPSs, or you're talking about 2, 3, 4U rack mount UPSs that are kind of built to order to a degree. And that's when you suddenly see price tags of, 1700, 2000 jump to 4, 5, 10 and higher. So do bear that in mind. But this has been a before you buy and a should you buy and a helpful guide on UPSs for NAS, and I hope you found this helpful. This is a tremendously mystifying subject for a number of users out there, and I've tried to keep this as chewable as possible. But as I say, there'll be a follow-up guide to this detailing a lot more on those recommendations of UPSs, as well as below a link to a full breakdown and guide to all of the UPSs that I've recommended for different scales, and I'll factor in a few other options for different preset scenarios there too. Click like if you've enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to learn more, use the free advice and guides over at NAS Compares, free advice blue button on the right, Ask NAS Compares the community forum, and if you do want to support this platform, my videos, and me and Eddie with NAS Compares, it is just the two of us, then please use the links in the description to take you to Amazon. It won't cost you anything extra to use them, but if you do use those links, anything, and I mean anything you buy after you get there from that link, results in a kickback to NAS Compares, which helps us continue doing what we do. But only do it if this video has genuinely helped you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.